Now turn to Section 1.
Section 1. In this section, you'll hear a conversation between two students in the dining hall of the college. First, you have some time to read questions 1 to 4. Now listen carefully to the conversation and answer questions 1 to 4.
Hi Max, how are you?
Hi Melanie, I'm fine. In fact, I'm preparing the coming holidays and I want to have a car tour with my friends.
That sounds lovely. How is your preparation?
Well, I haven't begun yet because I'm not quite sure how to rent a car and what the expense is like and something like this.
Ha, you've run into the right person. I did the same last holiday, and I can recommend it to you. I went to Avis Rent-A-Car Company, which is at 14A Dover Road, Oxford.
Let me write it down. Is it D-O-V-E-R?
Yes, and the telephone number is 634-0963. But if you book for the first time, dial another number with extension. That is 634-0853. Extension 54.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll have a try. Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to read questions 5 to 10. Now listen to the conversation between Max and the assistant and answer questions 5 to 10.
Good morning, Avis Rent-A-Car Company. How can I help you?
Hi, I want to book a car for tour. I want to inquire some information about the grade of the cars and the prices.
No problem. We offer a wide selection of rental cars to choose from luxury car to economy car, compact car, minivan, and pickup truck.
Well, luxury car is obviously out of my price range, but compact or economy is not big enough. You know, we have 7 persons together.
Well, how about a minivan? It's perfect for road trips and will make your journey feel like you're in a living room on wheels.
I think that's good. Well, what does it feature? I mean, what facilities does it have?
Unlike most minivans with manual transmission, the rental minivan cars have feature automatic transmission, air conditioning, and AM/FM stereo. If you drive a long, smooth way, you can use the cruise control, which will save you a lot of energy.
Good. How much is the price?
If you rent an intermediate one, it will cost you £55 each day. If it is standard, the cost is £45 per day.
I think the standard is enough.
Oh, we have a special 50% discount for weekends, from Friday to Sunday. But that doesn't apply to tax, recovery fees, and optional services.
What are the optional services?
Well, they usually include some extra facilities, like first aid kit or something like that.
I know. We plan to start off on Friday, so we have to prepare 1 day in advance. I want to book from 30th of April, which is Thursday, and it will end next Monday.
Okay. Could you leave your name and the driving license number?
My name is Max, and the license number is M9021.
Okay, you can pick up the car on Thursday noon. Besides, we offer some optional services like street maps, flashlight, and sunsheet. What would you like to have?
Flashlight is not necessary, I think, but street maps are useful, especially when we drive in a strange place. As for the sunsheet, I'd like to give that a miss. We don't want to spend too much extra money.
Okay, Mr. Max, thank you for calling.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You will hear a presenter on a radio phone-in show. The presenter is talking to a woman who was bitten by a poisonous spider.
Now you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Today we're continuing our Traveller's Tales. On the line we have Amanda Toddington, who had quite a nasty experience in Australia last year. Isn't that right, Amanda?
Yes. My husband and I were on holiday and we were staying at a friend's house on the coast near Brisbane. It was towards the end of the holiday and I was about to go into the garden and enjoy my breakfast. I walked out into the kitchen, slid my left foot into my shoe and felt a tiny sting. It was pretty painless, but I shook the shoe off my foot and saw this tiny spider running out as the shoe hit the wall. Anyway, not being an expert, I presumed the worst, that I'd been bitten by something that was going to kill me, and I completely lost control. I don't think I've ever screamed so much in all my life. We'd been told beforehand to always check our shoes before putting them on, as it's a common way to get bitten, so I suppose it was my own fault, really.
So what was it that had bitten you?
Tony, that's our Australian friend, he immediately asked me if I knew what had bitten me, and I pointed to the corner of the room where I'd last seen the spider. He picked up a jar and found the creature in the corner where the shoe had hit the floor. "It's a redback," he said, and he gently placed the jar over the spider. The funny thing was, we'd been talking about some of the creatures we needed to be careful of a few days previously, and as he said the name redback, the conversation came flooding back to me. In particular, the fact that the bite can be extremely painful. I've found out since that the redback is from the same family as the black widow spider, and it's the female that does the damage, which it turned out was what I'd been bitten by.
You must have been absolutely petrified.
You can say that again. I remember feeling quite confused. I wasn't in a great deal of pain to begin with, and yet I could see from our friends' faces that they were concerned. Tony explained that the venom or poison of the bite spreads quite slowly, so the pain doesn't feel too bad at first. Gwen, Tony's wife, brought an ice pack, and Tony held it against the bite to make it less painful. Apparently, you're not supposed to put a bandage on the area, as this can make it hurt even more. Tony tried to put my mind at rest by explaining that this was quite a common bite, that the hospital would have an antivenom, and that everything would be okay. But I was beginning to panic. We were flying back to the UK the next day, and I really didn't know what to do.
Now you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 16 to 20.
So what did you do?
Well, Tony phoned the doctor, who told him to check my symptoms for the next hour or two. As time went on, the pain became very intense, from my foot right up to my knee. My husband was on the internet and was reading out the possible symptoms. I wasn't feeling sick, and I hadn't yet developed a fever, but I had a terrible headache, and my foot was beginning to swell up. At this point, Tony decided to take me to the local hospital to be on the safe side. I really didn't want to go, as I had visions of being kept in for days and all our plans being spoilt. But Tony and my husband insisted. When we got to the hospital, I was relieved to see how casual everyone was when Tony explained I'd been bitten by a redback spider. They told me to take a seat and got on with their work.
And did you receive any treatment?
By the time I got to see a doctor, the pain was very intense indeed, and I was getting quite upset. The doctor decided to give me a dose of an antivenom, which he assured me would eventually deal with the problem. Unfortunately, he also explained that it wouldn't have an immediate effect and the symptoms might last for several days. But the story has a happy ending. My husband managed to book us onto another plane 1 week later. And even better news was that the symptoms of the bite finally cleared up after about 24 hours. Within a couple of days, I was back to normal again. So thanks to the spider, we managed to extend our holiday by a week.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You will hear 2 university students, Phil and Stella, talking to their tutor about their research project. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 27.
Come in. Ah, yes, Stella. Is Phil there too? Good. Come on in. Okay, so you're here to discuss your research projects. Have you decided what to focus on? You were thinking of something about the causes of mood changes, weren't you?
Yes, but the last time we saw you, you suggested we narrowed it down to either the effects of weather or urban environment. So we've decided to focus on the effects of weather.
Right, that's more manageable. So, your goal is, Phil?
To prove the hypothesis, no, to investigate the hypothesis that the weather has an effect on a person's mood.
Good. And what's your thesis, Stella?
Well, our thesis is that in general, when the weather's good, it has a positive effect on a person's mood, and bad weather has a negative effect.
Can you define your terms here? For example, what do you mean by good and bad?
Okay, well, good would be sunny, warm weather, and bad would be when it's cold and cloudy or raining.
And how would you define an effect on a person's mood? What would you be looking to find?
An effect on the way a person feels.
A change in the way they feel, like from feeling happy and optimistic to sad and depressed.
Right. And what sort of weather variables will you be looking at?
Oh, sunshine, temperature, cloudiness, precipitation, among others. It'll depend a bit what the weather's like when we do the survey.
Fine. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, what about background reading? I gave you some suggestions. Did you manage to read any of it?
Yes, we read the Ross Vickers article, the one comparing the groups of American Marines training in summer and winter. That's quite relevant to our study. It was interesting because the Marines who were training in the cold winter conditions tried to cheer themselves up by thinking of warm places, but it didn't really work.
Yes, they were trying to force themselves to have a positive mental outlook, but in fact it had the opposite effect, and they ended up in a very negative state of mind.
And we found some more research by someone who wasn't on the reading list you gave us, George Whiteborn. He compared people living in 3 countries with very different climatic conditions. Actually, he looked at several things, not just the weather. But he found some people's reactions to bad weather were much worse than others, and it was linked to how stressed they were generally. The weather on its own didn't have such a significant effect on mood.
And we looked at a paper by
Haverton.
Yeah, he broke weather up into about 15 or 16 categories and did qualitative and quantitative research. He found that humans respond to conditions in the weather with immediate responses, such as fear or amazement. But these responses can also be linked to associations from their earlier life, such as a particular happy or sad event.
Did you have a look at Stanfield's work?
Yes. It was interesting because the type of questions he asked was similar to what we were planning to use in our survey.
Yes.
He asked people how they were feeling on days with good and bad weather. He found the biggest factors seemed to be the humidity. Moods were most negative on days with a lot of rainfall. Long periods without sunshine had some effect, but nothing like as much.
That could be quite a useful model for your project.
Yes, we thought so too. Although we can't continue our survey for as long as he did. He did his over a 6-month period.
You now have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 28 to 30.
Right, well, you've made quite a good start. So, where are you going from here?
Well, we've already made the questionnaire we're going to use for the survey. It's quite short, just 8 questions. We're aiming to survey 20 people over a period of 3 months from October to December.
We can't specify the actual dates yet because it depends on the weather. We want to do the survey on days with a range of different weather conditions. And we'll just be working on campus, so our data will only be statistically sound for the student population here.
That's okay. Have you thought how you'll determine what will constitute each aspect of weather, and how many you're looking at?
We decided on 4. The amount of sunshine, cloudiness, temperature and precipitation. We thought we might use the internet to get data on weather conditions on the days we do the survey, but we haven't found the information we need, so we might have to measure it ourselves. We'll see.
Then we've got to analyse the results, and we'll do that using a spreadsheet, giving numeric values to answers. And then, of course, we have to present our findings to the class. And we want to make it quite an interactive session. We want to involve the class in some way in the presentation, maybe by trying to create different climatic conditions in the classroom, but we're still thinking about it.
I see. Well, that sounds as if you're on the right lines. Now, what I'd suggest that you think about, in addition to the work you've...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 4. You will hear part of a lecture about the film director Alfred Hitchcock.
Now you have some time to look at questions 31 to 34. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 34.
We've been talking about prominent film directors, and today I want to talk about one of the most influential directors of them all, Sir Alfred Hitchcock. I doubt there's anyone here who hasn't seen at least one of his movies. Let me give you some film titles. Put your hand up if you've seen it. Okay, The Birds, Vertigo, Rear Window, The 39 Steps, Marnie, and of course, the most famous of them all, Psycho. Okay, good. I can see you're all familiar with Hitchcock then. Now people assume that Hitchcock was from America, perhaps because he spent so much of his life working in Hollywood, but he was in fact born in London in 1899. He didn't actually emigrate until he was 40 years old. Most film critics would agree that Hitchcock had a huge impact on cinema. And you may be surprised to learn that he started making movies as early as the 1920s, when most films were silent. His first attempt, in 1922, actually ended in disaster. The film was ironically called Number 13, and production stopped at a late stage due to financial problems. But before he left Britain in 1939, he'd already made classics like Blackmail, the first film with sound made in Britain, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and The 39 Steps, and he was considered Britain's top director. So why was Hitchcock so influential? To start with, he pioneered techniques, especially in the genre of the psychological thriller. He was known as the master of suspense. During a career that spanned more than half a century, Hitchcock created a distinctive, perhaps unique style. One of his innovations was to use a camera the way a person watching would. This gave filmgoers the sense that they were voyeurs rather than just viewers. He exploited camera angles and used innovative editing techniques to build suspense and maximize anxiety. His eye for detail was astonishing. Did you know that the famous scene in Psycho, in which Marion is murdered in the shower, took a whole week to film? Yes, a scene little more than a minute long. There were around 60 camera positions, and the set had to constantly be deconstructed and reconstructed. Today, that kind of almost obsessive perfection simply wouldn't be cost-effective. A week filming one scene would blow the budget.
Now you have some time to look at questions 35 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 35 to 40.
So what were Hitchcock films about, and who were some of his typical characters? It would be wrong to say that Hitchcock made horror movies, suspense movies or psychological thrillers, but not horror. Hitchcock rarely showed acts of violence. The effort went into building up tension, creating a sense of unease. The viewers know that something terrible is going to happen. They don't need to actually see it. Although his stories feature psychopaths, murderers and fugitives on the run, the real strength of his work is the complex examination of his characters. His movies borrow many themes from psychoanalysis, so it's not surprising that his masterpiece is called Psycho. However, a recurring theme in Hitchcock's stories is the twist ending. That's when the story ends in the way viewers least expect it to. I mean, the good guy turns out to be the bad guy, for example. Think of Psycho. It's the element of surprise that makes the end so creepy. Now, Hitchcock's movies feature many other elements of surprise. Daring elements, in fact. Again, I'll refer to Psycho. Marion is the principal character, and it is her that the viewer relates to and empathizes with. Marion has stolen money, and the viewer wants to know if she will get away with her crime or be caught and punished. Suddenly, a third of the way into the story, Marion is murdered and the entire dynamic changes. The original storyline is put on hold and a whole new story begins. No longer able to identify with Marion, the viewer begins to empathize with the new principal character, and that, of course, is the murderer, Norman. In this way, Hitchcock manipulates the audience into seeing the story from a whole new perspective. Did you know that Hitchcock played a small part in each of his movies? He always had a cameo role, and this was a very clever move, as it helped him become known. Filmgoers could put a face to the director. Some might even say that before Hitchcock, the director was a far less significant individual in the filmmaking process. Nowadays, however, people go to see a particular director's movie regardless of who's starring in it.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Give it to me.